Hello. So, I'm going to be doing a quick little recording for my friend who wants to get into doing digital art. Now, the program I'm going to be using is Medibang Paint Pro. I'm going to presume that he's smart enough in order to install this software. It's free, you can get it on their website. I may even go to it if you wish. The Medibang Paint Pro website here. You can just find this. There will be some Japanese characters. You can go to the download page and you can download it for your desktop, and you can download it for Windows, and it's pretty good. You should probably make an account if you want to be able to install new brushes, but that's not really a big concern, unless you're doing something fairly advanced. You're going to be introduced to a screen like this when you open it up. Sometimes there'll be a little pop-up trying to sell you something like art supplies or different brushes. You can close out of that and it will open up this window here. You click on the Illustrate button. You determine how big you want your canvas. For myself, I'm going to go with 1000 by 1000 with a 350 dpi. Normally, though, if I'm going to be doing a D&D character token, I will do 512 by 512 with a 350 dpi. And I will create one of that size for this demonstration. So, to show you some things around here, on the top left, sometimes you can move these windows around. It's not that hard to do, but I do think my layout is comfortable and it's close to the defaults. So that's what I will be using. This is your color picker. This is your primary color. This is your secondary color. Click on the secondary color to swap to it. I'm going to be using black for mine. However, one of my first art tips that I generally use is I never use quite a full black. I would go for a 12, 12, 12. This is my usual black that I will use in my line art. You may say, why won't you use a real black? Well, there's a few reasons. One of the first ones is that it's a little less harsh. It's actually possible to shade a non-full black, and it generally will help you out in the long run. But you don't have to do that. That is just a small suggestion. And you can see the number up here in the top left. There's 12, 12, 12, the RGB values. Or 0C, 0C, 0C if you want to use hex grid. Below here you see the preview of your brush. Your controls here. This makes your line thinner. This will make your line less visible as an opaque, as lines behind it will now appear. Well, normally I leave this at 100 and this at about an 8.5. Down here are your different brush types. So if you take something like a mapping pen and we make that a bit bigger, you can see that the brush has these little imperfections in it, especially compared to the basic pencil. I quite like the mapping pen, and this is the one I will use the most often. However, there are other pencils that you can use, such as this one, which has a very rough texture. I don't like this one because it's actually very blurry by default. So I tend to use the mapping pen. Now, in using this, one of the first issues with 3D drawing is that a lot of people are going to go, here's my eye, here's my eye, here's the head, the face, the hair, and you'll make something that looks like this. The problem with this is that it is all two-dimensional. You're not making something on paper. That's the idea with art. Art here, in this case, we're trying to make a 3D object inside of a 2D space that will make sense to anybody who sees it. First thing you can do is you need to imagine this as a 3D space. This line is not going from this corner to this corner. This line is going in a 3D space from here to here. And that line has some volume. Here, this line will probably represent some sort of pure or dark. And it will be very effective to sort of create volume here. And you may think that this does not really have much weight on something like character art, but really it's all the same stuff. There's very little difference in creating this 3D area with the water and its waviness and the bench and its path and the bush and making a face where part of the face is going to have a nose, an eye, another eye, going to have hair. This hair is going to kind of come out over this shape. Going to have an ear. Going to have a mouth. The side of the head here will have its own unique shape because of the angle. You know, there's going to be shoulders on a shirt, and the guy's going to have a neck. And because we use some three-dimensional, because the nose is in front of this side, because this eye is closer than this eye, because this ear is visible and that ear isn't, this hair comes across the front, he looks a lot more natural than if I was just to sort of do it like this, you know? This and this is the difference between a 3D space and a 2D space. That's one of the big issues. Now, something that I usually do, and this is a little art tip from me to you, because I'm going to show you erasing now, is clicking on this little square here lets you paint with transparency. You don't have to use the erasure brush to erase something. Using the transparency brush tends to work a little bit better because it keeps that textured look. So if I want this line to be thinner, but I want to keep the texture on it, it's important that I use the brush, because if I was to use the eraser tool, see how it'll turn this nice textured brush into this like perfectly smooth little line here. And it doesn't look quite the same. Now that's something that up to you if you like or dislike, but I tend to use the transparency when erasing something more than the erasing tool. The second thing I'm using here is the selection tool to select part of the image and pressing the delete key to delete it. Now, the other thing with doing line work is understanding that, especially if you have just a mouse, you really don't have line thickness as a friend of yours. You're going to need to use tricks to get the line thickness to look good, such as adjusting the line thickness when you're about to work on details that you know you don't want to be as thick, and then increasing it again when you're going to be going for something you want a bit thicker, like the outline. And especially, you're going to want to go to the transparency tool sometimes and make it thin or thick, and then apply that a little bit to certain little corners so you can get this like fake the pen pressure by making the line start and end in little sharp ways. There's nothing wrong with leaving your lines a little on the thick side if you wish, but I do think that faking pen pressure will make it look a little bit more natural and interesting to observe. Now, the other thing that I'm going to be using a lot here is this navigation tool. I normally just use the scroll wheel to zoom in and out, and I will do that on my as my navigation. Or you can hold, oh, I guess you can't hold middle click in this one. The hand tool will let you click and drag, but if you click and drag up here in the navigator, you can do that as well, which makes things really nice, because if I'm zoomed in on his armpit and I want to go look at his eye, I just click on his eye and it'll go right up here. Down here is the layers tool. So generally, if I have a character like this and I add a new layer, and I draw on this layer, let's use a nice brash and bold color. Oh no, I've ruined it. Wait, I haven't. Because I have drawn on a separate layer, I can now change the order of the layers and put it behind. This is how I will usually do coloring. And when I color, I'm going to try to pick non-brash colors. You don't have to be realistic. You just have to pick colors that you know aren't going to be very bright or neon. It's hard to use those colors even in the best of times, and there's a time and a place for them. But if you used a full bright color, it would not look quite as good unless you knew what you were doing. So I tend to go for these very muted colors with a lot of gray. Generally in this area of the color graph, you can go a little bit more saturated if you wanted it to be a little bit brighter, if you wanted it to be, you can go here. Generally, your good human tones are going to be in this little area between red and yellow. You don't quite want it orange, but you don't quite want it red. You don't quite want it yellow. Your human tones are somewhere in there. And all your other fantasy races are somewhere on that mark. Now, this might not look perfect, but trust me, it'll look great when we're close to done. I'm not going for a super high detailed character. I'm just going to show you a little bit of how to do this. Now, one of the choices that I actively make here is I will look at the character I have and I will decide how many colors I want to include. One of the things that I will often do is I will color their shirt the same as their hair if they don't have a beard. This saves on the amount of colors that a character has, making them easier to identify when they're a tiny token on a giant map. And it will sort of help tie the character design together. Now, the reason I like to hand color this is because it will add little imperfections, it will add little bits outside of the lines. Depending on the type of brush you're using, you can end up with these little mixes and things kind of coming together. It's not really something you have to do, but I like to do it this way because it will create a little bit more life in what I'm trying to communicate. Because this guy's wearing like a vest or something, we can just color his arms perfectly. And I'm doing this all with just a mouse. I'm using my very standard vertical mouse, which isn't really that great for this sort of art project stuff. It doesn't have the precision of a more flat mouse, but it tends to be pretty good. Your right click will let you color pick, so if I'm looking at the skin and I right click, I can get that color easily, which can be useful for cleaning up things. I feel like I've done a good enough job, and I feel like that this character could be used in a D&D campaign. For my next trick, if you really want to practice a lot, I suggest getting a video game. For my example, I already have a few screenshots, but I'm going to go into my art exports, and I think I have some in my work folder here somewhere. Where is my work folder? There it is. And then I need to find game screenshots. Generally, what I like to do is like a good practice on creating a 3D space is I'll take a video game screenshot I like and I will drop it into this side area here. And if I put it on the bottom, I can then use Control T to move it around, and then I can resize it here using these corner tools. Get it to a spot where you kind of like it. It doesn't have to be great or perfect. We're just using this for practice. Then I will go over here to the opticity tool on the right hand side, which will make this layer harder to see. I will set it to about 40 or 50. It doesn't really need to be precise, just so that you know you're drawing on the right layer. I will click a new layer here down there, and I will go down and I will make this. Now what I'll do here now is take this screenshot and just sort of recreate it. The idea is that this is a learning experience to take the shapes that you see and recreate them, forcing you to think in a third dimension, because that's one of the harder things to do when it comes to drawing, is thinking in this third dimension on this two-dimensional plane. And it's something that's like really easy to do when you have a screenshot that you're just tracing. And this sort of trace work really helps build your skills. You don't have to be very accurate or anything. This is just for your own practice. And this is a great way to get familiar with your tools, and I'm just using the basic mouse tool. If I really wanted this to be great, I would use much different techniques. But for me, this is an example. I'm not too attached to it. Now with this little piece of art, we can get rid of the background, and we can see that we did okay. I wouldn't call this a good job, but it was definitely a job. If I wanted to do this better, I could probably make a new layer, and then I could use something like the line tool. I think this is the line tool. It's been a while. No, that's not the line tool. What is the line tool? Is this the line tool? Yes, this is the line tool. So if you click on this square, this is the line tool. It's actually multiple tools. You see up here in this top area where you have the line, you have this zigzag line, which you can make nodes on by left clicking. You have your curved line, which you make 2 nodes on, and then your third node will make a curve. You have a square tool, a circle tool, and a polygon tool, which will make polygons based on the points you select. I'm going to focus on this zigzaggy line tool here because that will let me make slightly more accurate lines. You see how the tool, though, that I was using doesn't really like cooperating with this type of line work. That's okay. I don't really need it to be outstanding. I'm just trying to make something to practice with. But as you can see, using this line tool has already made a lot of the work on these details look a lot better. It's more consistent, it's stronger. The downside of this is that I'm not really getting as much practice in the physical motion as I would be with something that is less tool dependent. And I'm also adapting these to the tool that I'm practicing with. As you can see, these normally smooth arcs, I'm just making little triangles because at this point, I feel like that's an acceptable compromise for the type of tool I'm working on, as to trying to do the full arcs will be quite cumbersome. You'll find that a line tool will be a very valuable asset. It's like any other tool, though. You shouldn't let it define your whole toolbox. But as you can see, we've recreated this game screenshot in such a way that it looks nice. One of the early tricks that I used a lot to get a lot of characters pushed out was to utilize Hero Forge in a way that would exist as an absolutely stellar reference point. So if I had wanted to make some kind of dog character using Hero Forge, I would simply put together roughly what I would want, and we'll say that this is acceptable. Put it in a pose that I don't think is particularly offensive. Maybe give them a funny hat or something to give me an idea on what I'm dealing with. Yeah, we'll just go with something like this. And if I was to take this screenshot here, place it here into my setting, this is a bit of a curse technique, but it's something that you should be honest about if you're going to use it. There's nothing wrong with tracing, especially if you're learning, which you are. So one of the things I'll suggest here is, once again, we turn this down. I don't know why this is shifting like that. I think it believes that I'm using the draw tool for something. And then we can use our tools just as we were before to make this character. And all of a sudden, you have a pretty completed character. I wouldn't call this a totally original work, however, it's okay. You don't need to be totally original. Sometimes you just need a little bit of help getting there. And if we get rid of that, it looks okay. The big trick here, though, is that you're kind of going to be learning a little bit about how to actually build in 3 dimensions. So if we go back to our pen tool here, and we'll just make our friend here really tiny, we're going to use him as our reference. Now, a reference is a totally acceptable thing to do. There's nothing wrong with using a reference. I'm going to paint on this new layer, and we're going to make something using this reference. And because I'm using this as my reference, rather than using this as my reference, we're kind of a layer deeper on the whole understanding of shapes. And I'm kind of doing things a little differently than I did the first time. And I'm doing things a little differently than I would have done the second time. I'm going to make this look a little better by getting rid of that. It's kind of a pig nose right now, isn't it? We do this, and we do this, and we do this. That makes it a bit more of a dog nose. And that kind of comes up like this. Then we go this, like this. We kind of draw the line of the body there, here, and that kind of comes, whoops. One of the things that gets kind of tricky to do when we are drawing is keeping everything in proportion. You do have to zoom out every once in a while to like look at stuff and make sure that you're keeping it all above board. Because if something kind of falls out of proportion, it's really hard to wrangle it back in. Especially if you keep drawing it like that. This isn't really my best work, but I am mostly just demonstrating things. This is what you will need to do for basic most art on this program. You have your pen tool, your eraser tool, and this I think is your lasso erase. So if we were to go to here and I did this, and I did this, because we have layer 6 selected, and I'm erasing on layer 6. If I had layer 3 selected and I erase a bunch of stuff, it won't touch layer 3, which is useful because you don't want to erase your color when you're working on line art. You don't want to erase your line art when you're working on color. The bucket tool will be a devil. It will plead with you. It will try to make you use it. I find the bucket tool to be useful only in very rare situations, because the moment you start really working on this bucket tool is the moment that you will lose a piece of yourself to the bucket tool. You will start drawing everything as if it needs to be drawn for the bucket tool and not for how you want to draw it. I think the bucket tool is a totally fine and appropriate tool. That's all you really need to know to get started in this program. Control Z is your undo, and if you really want to do symmetrical work, I suggest scrolling down to find the symmetry pen, which I think is somewhere in the S. I may have moved it in my list. It's been a while. Yeah, the symmetry pen. And if you hold Control, it will let you place the origin of symmetry. The symmetry pen works about how you would expect it. It lets you draw kind of whatever you want in a symmetrical way. Really good for needing to do sort of difficult work that will be looking straightforward. And I think that's enough. The 30-minute tutorial should be more than enough for you to get started on this program all on your own. I'm excited to see what you make.